This is one of those cases where what seems like a normal day for a college student turns into an absolute nightmare. She was expected at the airport, but 19-year-old Mia just vanished after her work shift at her own apartment complex. When an officer arrived to do a welfare check at her apartment, he saw something impossible. Her bedroom door was barricaded from the inside. That wasn't the only chilling detail. When we reveal who had access to her room, you'll understand the true horror of this story. Hi, this is Tom again. Let's not drag this out. Just type it out. What city are you from? What time is it for you right now? What's your weather like? What about your eye color? So today we have the case of Mia Makano. Yes, for this story, we are returning to the United States. We're flying over South Florida, landing in Pembroke Pines. It's a pretty large city, just 20 miles north of Miami, close enough to feel the big city vibes, but probably far enough to have its own identity. Of course, this is Florida in all its glory, right? You have the sun, you have the sand. Locals also insist the food is great. They say there's a lot to do in Pembroke Pines thanks to the great weather, supposedly a strong cultural scene. It's in this seemingly idyllic place we find our main person, Mia Makano, her family. Mia was born on April 26, 2002. Her father, Marlon Makano, was a fairly well-known DJ, performed under the name DJ Eternal Vibes, an interesting choice. Her mother, Emma Scarbriel, was already living separately at the time of the events, all the way in the Virgin Islands. But despite this geographical distance, they say Mia was very confident, very cheerful as a child. I mean, even though the classic mom-dad together family wasn't there, Mia got strong support from both. That's already rare, a huge advantage. You also have an older brother, Marlon Jr., with her stepmother, Giselle Blanche. We see a picture, well, at least in the photographs, where Mia is genuinely surrounded by love. It seems this was one of those blended families that surprisingly worked. Such an environment, of course, must have shaped her character. She grew up to be an interesting personality. Even though Mia was petite, her height barely reached 5 feet, that's about 152 centimeters, she compensated with enormous inner strength, a lot of confidence. It's that small but strong-willed type of case. She grew up in the Sunshine State, graduated from the local Charles Flanagan High School. In her free time, she didn't just sit around. She participated in carnivals, especially the Miami Broad Carnival. So she clearly loved life, energy, the crowds. Her graduation was in May 2020. May 2020. Remember that time? Just a few months after the world essentially stopped because of COVID. This was a colossal disappointment for her entire generation. Imagine you spend 12 years working towards this moment, then everything is taken away. No prom, no normal final classes, no parties. Everything just canceled. Many people broke back then, took a pause, decided to wait it out. But Mia, it seems, was cut from a different cloth. She was ambitious. She wanted to move forward into adulthood, despite the unfolding apocalypse. Really, why go far if you already live in Florida, where, in many people's opinion, the weather is the best in the country? So she chose the University of Central Florida, or UCF, just 200 miles north of home. She started her studies that same year, 2020. Though after the first year in Orlando, Mia transferred from UCF to Valencia College. Maybe she was looking for something different, or maybe it was related to finances or a specific program. Initially, she was pursuing a Bachelor of Arts degree, but at the same time, she was looking into sports medicine or physical therapy. This was a person actively trying to find herself. Like any normal student learning to be an adult, Mia understood she had to make ends meet. She got a part-time job. Her workplace was the leasing office at Arden Villas, a student housing complex that, of course, called itself luxury off-campus apartments. Well, we all know those luxury student apartments. They were located right next to UCF. For Mia, this was the perfect setup because she lived there too. Maximum convenience. Just go downstairs, you're at work. But the reviews for Arden Villas, even before 2021, were, well, let's just say mixed. That's the polite way of saying not everything was smooth. On the plus side, a pool, a gym, pet-friendly, the staff, which Mia was part of, was friendly. But the downsides? Classic. Maintenance was terrible. Parking was a constant problem. The rent was too high for what they offered. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But Mia managed. She knew how to navigate things. She somehow managed to find time for everything, for her studies, for work at Arden Villas, even just to be a student, to live that life. As far as anyone could tell, the office job itself wasn't bad. Yes, she had to take inconvenient shifts, Friday evenings, weekends, but that's college life. Everyone goes through it. However, there was one issue. Mia had a few uncomfortable encounters. There was this one maintenance guy who was acting way too persistent, flirting. We, it seems, already know how stories that start with a too persistent maintenance guy usually end. Mia, however, always rejected his advances. This wasn't a cute or romantic pursuit. She very clearly saw him as a somewhat obsessive creep. You know, the type of guy who makes your skin crawl. Eventually, or so it seemed, he left her alone. But did he really? In September 2021, the Florida summer didn't seem to know it was supposed to be over. It was still in full, suffocating swing, dragging on longer than anyone could stand. The air was thick with humidity, thunderstorms were a regular thing, all the locals were desperately waiting for any hint of the cooler fall months. For Mia, it was the usual chaos. She continued to balance work, college, trying to get everything done. But there was a bright spot in her schedule. She was planning to visit her family back home in Pembroke Pines soon. So the plan was this. On Friday, September 24th, Mia was supposed to fly. It was a short 1-hour flight from Orlando back to Lauderdale. But, of course, work first. She had to finish her shift at Arden Villas. She clocked out at 5 p.m. In theory, Mia had just enough time to dash home, grab her bags, head to the airport. The schedule was tight, very tight. No room for delays, no surprises. But Mia was optimistic. She was just excited to see her family soon. However, this is exactly where things start to go wrong. After her shift ended, Mia just disappears from the radar. She wasn't responding to any text messages or phone calls. Let's agree, in this day, when your phone is an extension of your hand, that's an immediate red flag. Of course, the first thoughts are rational. Maybe she was just in a frantic rush, trying to catch that flight. Or maybe her phone simply died, or there were connection issues. At this stage, no one was sounding the alarm, not yet. But the evening wore on. Her parents were already waiting on the other side, at the Lauderdale airport. Their slight worry began to morph into something much worse when her flight arrived, but Mia wasn't on board. Imagine that moment. The doors open, passengers file out, your child isn't there. Panic, pure, unfiltered fear. They immediately called Mia's cell, desperately trying to find out where she was, or at least hear her voice, confirm she was okay. But Mia was silent. She was silent all evening. She had, figuratively, just vanished into thin air. This disappearance was completely out of character for Mia. As with most tragic incidents, it's that silence, that sudden change in routine behavior, that screamed danger. She was not the type of person to just drop off the grid. At 9:30 p.m., patience ran out. A call came into the Orange County Sheriff's Office requesting a welfare check to see how Mia was doing, what was happening at her apartment. Then, at 9:42 p.m., pretty quickly, a deputy sheriff was dispatched to Arden Villas. The officer arrived a little after 10 p.m. He knocked loudly on the apartment door 3 times, but the only answer was silence. No one opened up. Eventually, one of Mia's roommates appeared. When they looked inside together, the roommate noticed a detail that immediately raised suspicion. The door to Mia's bedroom was locked. In the official incident report, Officer Paulino Samir noted a key point. Looking through the bedroom window, he saw it was unlocked. The officer decided to act. He opened that unlocked window to get a slightly better look at what was inside. The scene he saw was disturbing. Furniture, some piece of furniture, was brazenly pushed up against the bedroom doorknob from the inside. It looked like a makeshift barricade. It was clearly placed there for one purpose, to keep anyone from entering from the outside. This isn't just weird anymore, this is sinister. But that was only the beginning. A few other details also looked completely out of place. Jewelry was scattered around the room, as if during a struggle or a hasty robbery. Her luggage, the very bag she was supposed to take to the airport, was still in the room. She never left. Worst of all, the pillow on the bed had disturbing stains. When the officer asked the roommates if there was anyone suspicious in Mia's life, someone she might be dating or who had recently befriended her, they immediately mentioned one person, a maintenance worker at the complex. His name? Armando Caballero. The roommate stated that Armando had been trying, quite persistently, to go on a date with Mia for a long time, but as we already know, she always refused his advances. She described their relationship as just friends, but it seems that was a one-sided definition. Meanwhile, Mia's family, they are not the kind of people who just sit by the phone waiting for news. They are people of action. Feeling that every second counted, they got together, got in the car, started driving. They covered the 200 miles north to Orlando, arriving at the epicenter of events just before 3 a.m. Officer Paulino was still on scene, working the case, when they arrived at Arden Villas. Early that morning, he was met by Mia's determined family members. It was they, with the sharp eyes of loved ones, who quickly pointed out several oddities that the deputy might have missed. First, a yellow box cutter was found under her rug. A strange place for such an item no one recognized as belonging to Mia. The other discovery was, let's say, a bit more confrontational, because shortly after the family arrived at Arden Villas, that same maintenance man, Armando, also showed up. The very fact of his presence at the scene at 3 a.m., that was more than enough to instantly ignite the family's emotions. They didn't just hear the name, they actually knew who he was. They had heard a lot about him from Mia over the previous months, about his obsessiveness, about her discomfort. Now, here he was. Armando, perhaps sensing the tension, started telling the police some story about a mutual colleague named Tati, trying to shift the focus. But Mia's family wasn't buying it for a second. They immediately voiced their suspicions to the police. Then, right there in the parking lot, this happened.
You keep mentioning Tati and no one knows Tati. The roommates don't even know Tati.
You've been sleeping since 10
keep
o'clock
saying
and all of a
Tati is
sudden
a
you're showing
friend.
up here at 4 o'clock in the morning looking for me.
Tati were conversating about it till I finally, it came
Okay,
up.
but
Should I go
Tati
and
is
see if I
someone-
see anything?
No one knows Tati. That's my whole thing.
The roommate doesn't even know Tati, which is, well, very convenient.
Not
Tati
even the
is
roommate
an
knows
employee
Tati.
here.
She's an employee, but you keep saying Tati is a friend and that you've all hung out together. As of right now, you have
work
sent
tomorrow? You work
obsessive
tomorrow,
texts to
Tati?
Mia. We have all seen the texts. You talked about giving her your life savings. You cash out her money, and you claim that you weren't in touch.
Who told her gave
It's
her
on
life
text.
savings? I never
As a
said
matter of
that.
fact, we're going to get a police report to pull your phone records if that's the case.
What you trying to do?
The family, heartbroken but furious, didn't stay silent. They confronted Armando directly, laying out the facts to his face. They stressed they were well aware he had been sending Mia obsessive, unwanted text messages. Beyond that, he literally tried to buy her, sending her money through Cash App. Then, at one desperate moment, even offered her all his savings. This wasn't just courting anymore, it was obsession. Armando, of course, rejected it all. He just walked away. The police probably should have taken much more action, but they didn't. Let's recap. You have the family's testimony about the stalking. You have Armando's own strange behavior. You also have the undeniable fact he showed up at the scene at 4 in the morning. This isn't just suspicion, it's a red flag the size of Texas. Unfortunately, he was just let go. No further questions. It seems, initially, the police didn't suspect Armando could be involved at all. They just let him go. Armando himself told officers he last saw Mia at work at 3 p.m. This was about 2 hours before she was supposed to finish her shift, then suddenly vanished. By Saturday afternoon, Mia's info was finally uploaded to the FCIC. Soon after, an official missing person alert was issued. But it felt like the officers weren't rushing the investigation. They followed protocol, but without much urgency. Mia's family, however, they didn't wait. In fact, they took matters into their own hands. That same morning, they found him, then watched Armando discreetly from their car, becoming detectives out of necessity. What they saw wasn't just a signal, it was a deafening siren. They watched Armando get out of his silver Ford Fusion. He was seen taking a blanket, one glove, also some kind of bag from the car, before quickly going into his apartment, located in Seminole County. The family had no doubt. They recognized it instantly. They were absolutely sure the blanket belonged to Mia. So, knowing this, they immediately called 911. Castleberry police officers responded to that call. After they arrived, right there outside his home, another extremely uncomfortable, tense confrontation happened between Armando, Mia's furious family, with the officers caught in the middle. The problem was procedure. Without a valid search warrant, the officers' hands were tied. They couldn't legally enter his apartment, even with the family's testimony. But then Armando makes a strange move. To everyone's surprise, he allowed Mia's family to look around his apartment. Maybe it was bravado, maybe he had already hidden everything. Whatever the case, they found nothing significant, nothing that pointed to Mia. So, the result: no warrant, no evidence found during this strange walkthrough. Armando was free to go about his business. Mia's family, the Mocanos, they weren't just disappointed, they were devastated, furious. They just knew in their gut that Armando had something to do with Mia's disappearance. What happened next only amplified that horror. Armando's next move made their hearts sink even further. That same day, at 3 p.m., Armando hopped in his car, drove off, then disappeared. Meanwhile, the sheriffs were finally starting to catch up. They already knew Armando had shown a serious interest in Mia. What an euphemism for obsession. But as precious time ticked by, those text messages the family had been screaming about finally started to worry them more. So, at 4:30 p.m. on Saturday, that is almost 24 hours after Mia's disappearance, a warrant was finally issued for Armando's arrest. Within the next hour, detectives finally gained access, searched, securing his apartment. But it was a classic too little, too late. Why? Because Armando was already gone. He had left his home a free man at 3 p.m., less than 2 hours earlier. While police were getting the paperwork, he was already long gone. Investigators, digging deeper, soon established something critical. On Friday, the day Mia disappeared, someone accessed her apartment, not by force. It was done using a master key fob around 4:30 p.m., before Mia had even finished her shift. As a maintenance worker, Armando, of course, had such a key. After that key fob's ID was linked directly to Armando Caballero, this new information officially made him the prime suspect. At minimum, he had illegally entered her apartment without her consent. Now the county sheriffs finally started seriously looking into his profile. Finding Armando became absolutely essential to Mia's disappearance investigation. This was no longer just a family theory. But now they had to, so to speak, look both ways. The question wasn't just where Armando was on Friday, but also where he was hiding now. Trying to figure this out, detectives began pulling his cell phone records, tracking his movements. But this bureaucratic investigation, getting data from carriers, was going to take time, precious time. Emotions ran incredibly high over the weekend. 2 days passed. Mia remained silent, so did Armando. It seemed the longer the case dragged on, the more unbearable questions arose. Where is Mia? That's the main question. Is she alive? Will she ever come home? Where is Armando? Is he on the run? Is he even with her? Is he holding her somewhere? Despite the horror of the situation, Mia's family, as well as the investigators, remained deeply committed, desperately hopeful of finding Mia alive. Also, of course, finding Armando. But on Monday afternoon, September 27th, the silence broke. News came, but it wasn't the news anyone was hoping for.
What do you need police, fire, medical?
We found a on property. Someone hung themselves from a garage. Is a male?
Okay.
Yes, a male.
All right. He's deceased, beyond any help?
I believe so.
Okay.
He's
all right.
dead, right?
A cleaning lady, just working her shift at the Zabal Club, went into one of the facility's regular garages. She turned on the light, stumbled upon a terrible scene. She found Armando Caballero. Here are his last hours. He left his apartment at 3 p.m. on Saturday, right before police finally got the warrant. He then drove to Lake Zabal in Longwood. It's unclear exactly when he took his own life, but we know at 9:35 p.m. that evening, he sent his last text. That was it. So in the middle of this terrible story, the main suspect had passed. He took all the answers with him. This didn't just look bad, it was a complete dead end. Armando taking his own life was shocking, but it also served as an awful hint, a very disturbing conclusion to Mia's fate. Let's be honest, an innocent person doesn't do that, not during an open investigation into a missing girl he was obsessed with. This was basically a silent confession. Still, despite this catastrophic change, Mia's family miraculously remained strong, resilient. They clung to hope. Maybe his passing meant nothing. Maybe Mia was still out there somewhere. At this point, nobody knew anything. The journey ahead became 1,000 times harder, filled with absolute, crushing uncertainty. They had no suspect to question. No one was left to answer the main question: where is she? Instead, all hope rested on cold data, on digital forensics teams tracking Armando's every move, using surveillance records, using cell phone data. Over the next few days, dozens of Mia's family members flew in from everywhere, from as far as Canada, the Caribbean, to support the search efforts. As these days passed, Mia's story reached the hearts of many. The number of volunteers, complete strangers wanting to help search for Mia, just kept growing. Efforts were concentrated in a 30-mile radius around the Arden Villas complex. The focus was on the worst places to search: lakes, rivers, dense brush, also swamplands. By September 30th, the emergency response team had conducted over 30 separate searches, covering 3 counties: Orange, Seminole, Volusia. Orange County deputies also intensified the search at Arden Villas itself. That's when the FBI stepped in, supporting the Orange County Sheriff's Office, trying to increase the chances of finding Mia. Her loved ones held vigils, praying, collectively hoping for her safe return. Some of these events attracted hundreds of people. Investigators were also working hard. Using Armando's cell data, they established that in the days before Mia's disappearance, he'd been to several specific areas, including downtown Orlando, the Paramore area, those same 3 counties. While officers followed Armando's trail, they noticed he'd recently visited one notorious area, Timberscan. Timberscan, it's definitely not a place you go for a stroll. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Almost every city has its share of tough neighborhoods. Well, you do not want to be in Timberscan at night. Located southwest of downtown Orlando, Timberscan is an old condominium complex near Lake Catherine. Built in 1972, it was slowly dying. The 2010 foreclosure crisis led to a sharp increase in abandoned apartments. Over time, the vacancy rate in Timberscan only grew. Struggling with payments, the complex eventually lost trash collection services. Then it lost its water supply. This just pushed more residents to abandon their homes. In short, it's a terrible, neglected place. Despite its proximity to downtown, they say even Google Maps doesn't want to visit. Its name was strongly associated with drugs, violence, unfortunate passings. What's worse, between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. on the night Mia disappeared, Armando's phone pinged right here. Investigators learned Armando himself had once lived in Timberscan, so he knew the area very well. After getting this new information, Orange County Police immediately decided to investigate the Timberscan area. So, on the morning of October 2nd, 2021, search teams began combing the area, going through abandoned buildings, neglected wooded areas. At 10:45 that morning, the search ended. With a heavy heart, it was reported that officers found Mia Meccano. Her purse, holding her ID, was found nearby. It was obvious Mia had been there for some time. She was bound with black duct tape. The condition she was found in, I can't share those specifics due to platform policies. This was not the news Mia's family or thousands of others had hoped for. Of course, this started the long, painful journey of grief. The fact police found Mia in the same place Armando was known to be just hours after her disappearance was enough to believe he was responsible. If his taking his own life wasn't suspicious enough, this cemented it. Later that night, another vigil was held for Mia. This time, all hope had turned into pure, raw despair. This time, it was to mourn the tragic loss of Mia Meccano. As news of her passing spread, questions began to arise about who was responsible. Of course, Armando was responsible, but given that he completely avoided any accountability, who was responsible for allowing him to commit his actions at all? It was quite obvious. There was blatant negligence in this case. Mia's family attorney, Daryl Washington, started saying what was obvious to everyone, except it seems the complex management. He stressed that the Arden Villas apartment complex, where Mia not only lived but also worked, should have done much, much more to ensure resident safety. It's just elementary. As it turned out, this is where it gets really disgusting. This wasn't Armando's first offense. This wasn't just trouble with the law. It was a clear pattern. Back in March of that same year, working at another apartment complex, yes, another one, he'd already had serious problems with another young woman. The pattern was the same. He sent her a note asking her out. The 24-year-old girl, maybe out of politeness, hesitantly accepted, agreeing to meet him in a few days. But then he turns up the pressure. He asked her to move the date to that same night. Her intuition, fortunately, kicked in. She changed her mind, turned him down. His reaction to no? Just a few hours later, while this woman was in her room, a dumbbell flew through her window. Not a rock, a dumbbell. An officer was called to investigate, who documented everything. There's even body cam video. Although it wasn't confirmed 100% in court, let's be honest, it's very likely Armando is the idiot behind this incident. What are the chances it's just a coincidence? If it's true, which it almost certainly is, it clearly shows his uncontrolled, petty aggression when women tell him no. That's not all. Case details, publicly available in Polk County online records, show Armando had already faced law enforcement back in 2013. Not for stealing gum. He set off a small homemade explosive device at a middle school, as a joke. Fortunately, no one was harmed then, but it led to prosecution. So we have explosives, dumbbell aggression, stalking. This portrait somehow passes a background check. One of the many disgusting things about this case is Arden Villa's reaction to Mia's disappearance. It took them 3 days to just publicly acknowledge she was missing. The very next day, instead of showing remorse, they went into corporate defense mode. They denied any negligence in the background check when hiring Armando. Their excuse? They claimed those previous offenses were committed by another person with the same name. Seriously? But Armando's full name, his date of birth, are in those court documents. So they're claiming there are 2 people in the world with the identical full name, middle name, surname, with the exact same date of birth, both living in Florida? That is just ridiculous. It's insulting. In any case, there are only 2 options. Both are terrible. Either they knew about Armando's past, chose to ignore it because cheap labor, or they just didn't know because their background check is a sham. In both cases, when Arden Villas decided to hire him, not a shred of due diligence or care was applied. Here is the result. A dangerous, unstable person was given a universal master key, a key to every student apartment in the complex. Without proper supervision, without even normal lighting on the property, it was a disaster waiting to happen. In the days after Mia's passing, residents of Arden Villas, surrounding areas, came out to protest, demanding the obvious from the company: increased security measures. The complete, icy lack of compassion from Arden Villas didn't help them. They never took even partial responsibility for creating these circumstances. They never reached out to Mia's family. No apology, no letter of condolence, nothing. Hello, she wasn't just a resident you were squeezing money from, she was also your employee, a friend to many in the complex. Like I said, even before Mia's passing, Arden Villas didn't have high ratings on Google. Since then, their rating has, expectedly, hit rock bottom. I couldn't help but notice that many of those earlier reviews also focused on the general sloppy maintenance. It makes me wonder, maybe Armando was as bad at his job as a plumber/handyman as he was at being a decent human being. But the criticism wasn't just aimed at the company. The family's lawyer also criticized authorities for not taking action sooner. Because if they had detained him that Saturday, when the family was literally begging them to, Armando would still be alive. He would have had to face the consequences for his actions in court. Maybe then, if he was willing to talk, he could have provided answers. He could have revealed what happened in Mia's final terrible hours. Near the end of December 2021, Mia's autopsy results were finally released. It was another painful moment. The report states the way she was found, bound with multiple restraints, left in an abandoned area, all of it unquestionably indicates something terrible. But unfortunately, due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of her passing remains undetermined. This means we will never really know how exactly Mia passed. We don't know the exact physical circumstances of what happened before or after. This inability to know the truth, this black hole at the end, it's probably an absolutely devastating burden for Mia's family. They don't have the full picture. Mia Meccano's vigil service was held at the Cooper City Church of God on October 14, 2021. She was later interred at Bailey Memorial Gardens in North Lauderdale. Mia is remembered as what she was, a shining light in her family. They remember her as funny, cheerful, family-oriented, full of love. Again, let's not forget, this was a young woman at the very beginning of her adult life. She had plans, she had a future. She deserved the basic right to feel safe not only at home, but also at work. Her home, her work, they were the same place, the place that betrayed her. Unfortunately, a heartless man who couldn't take no was given a master key. He was given the opportunity to catch her off guard in her own home, end her life, then, like the ultimate coward, end his own, avoiding all responsibility. But Mia's family turned their pain into action. After her passing, they founded the Mia Meccano Foundation. It was established to support, educate, provide resources to other families facing the nightmare of missing persons, also to protect students, our most vulnerable populations. Mia's Law, a law aimed at genuinely improving safety, personal security, and residential buildings in Florida, is already making its way through the state legislature. This is her legacy. Mia's family, her loved ones, continue to fight for a safer world, so no other family has to go through this. Below, I'll leave a link to Mia's foundation. I think we've covered most of the difficult details of this case. Unfortunately, like I said, too many questions remain. Most of them Armando took with him. Maybe one day we will learn more about Mia's final hours, but unfortunately, for now, this is where it stands. I wish Mia's family all the best. I hope Mia's Law truly makes a significant difference, saves many lives in the future. It's the only light in this dark story. This story shows us that the most terrible evil isn't just the act of one disturbed person. The worst thing is the system that gives this person the keys to every door. Mia should have been safe, in her home, at her job, but the company she trusted betrayed her, putting cheap labor above her life. Now tell us honestly, what shocked you more? The awful act itself, or the blatant negligence of the Arden Villas complex, which gave the man responsible a master key despite his obvious dangerous past? Do you think the police could have saved Mia if they had detained Armando when the family was literally begging them to that night? Who, in your opinion, bears more responsibility? The perpetrator himself, or the system that failed every step, allowing this to happen? Have you had similar stories where you felt unsafe but no one listened? Share them in the comments. Let's talk about this. If this story affected you, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. It will shock you even more. May Mia Meccano rest in peace. The Old Testament says, "He who digs a pit for another will fall into it." Although Armando eventually fell into his own pit, it didn't bring justice for Mia. Take this story as a warning. Never let indifference cloud your conscience. Always trust your intuition. Fight for the truth, even when the system tells you to be quiet. Now look at the screen. You see the next videos we've prepared for you. Believe me, we worked just as hard on those. If this case shocked you, the next one will surpass everything you've seen. So we aren't saying goodbye. God bless you. We'll see you there.